Morning, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to log on to watch this recording of our chat with Helen Thomas, as we say, aka Blonde Money, entitled "When Leaders Get Lost." Helen, unfortunately, Helen was due to join us in person this morning, but unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. So she's joining us, as I like to say, live from the centre of English or British politics, Oxford, okay, where it appears you have to be a PPE, which I think, Helen, you are also a PPE.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
5 or 6 or whatever number of British prime ministers have been PPEs. So we'll get into that in detail later on. Helen, when we decided to do this talk, I'm kind of entitled "When Leaders Get Lost," Liz Truss was still Prime Minister, and we sent out the original invite. We could have sent out the lettuce the day with the Daily Star, but we thought it was disrespectful. So we went with the picture of the Muppet Show. Don't was being too disrespectful. So time has moved on, and we have a new Prime Minister. But one of the things that confuses me or intrigues me is, can you give us some insight into the difference between the policies that Liz Truss was trying to pursue and the person, okay? And what exactly was Trussonomics, okay? And many commentators would have felt that some of our policies, and if I sort of use it as being my working title for Trussonomics is "Go for Growth" economics, was quite sensible. Okay, so if we can give us some, if you can,
yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you virtually, even if not physically. But you're right, by the way. Here I am in Oxford. I did study PPE, philosophy, politics and economics, not to be confused with personal protective equipment, which is, I think, what more people know it as. And yeah, actually, Rishi Sunak was in my year at Oxford. I knew him a bit at university. So yeah, when we talk about the character of Liz Truss, we may well get into the character of Rishi Sunak as well. It does inform their policies, the kind of people they are, that's for sure. So let's talk then about, as you say, Trussonomics. Well, here's the thing. She comes in and she is looking at a stagflation problem. It's actually a problem that's across the sort of developed Western world, really. We've had, huge jumps in inflation, but growth really hasn't kept track with that, which of course is why we face such a difficult policy mix. Because if you had loads of growth and loads of inflation, reining it back in, wouldn't be quite so painful. But of course, if you have stagnant growth, then you have more of a problem. So the idea really of Trussonomics was the government would take care of the stag bit of that by getting growth going and leave the monetary authority to deal with the inflation bit. So let's say they went for growth, got more inflation. Well, look, there are tools to deal with that. In fact, I heard Chair Powell talk about it, the FOMC last night. He said, look, if we have a lot of inflation, we know what to do about that. They can really jack up interest rates more if they need to. But if you have stagflation, then that's a real mess. So broadly speaking, if we want to make it simple to understand, Trussonomics is loose fiscal and tight monetary policy. And that is quite a change from the orthodoxy, as she likes to call it, the orthodoxy of the previous sort of 14 years. And I should just say something about the character of Liz Truss. Why this obsession with orthodoxy? What's she so annoyed about? Well, to be quite honest with you, although she did do PPE at Oxford as well, she felt a bit of an outsider to some degree. I think, being a woman in that world, having gone to a comprehensive school, although she was actually born in Oxford, she felt a little bit like she wasn't one of the team, one of the guys, and that meant, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna show you how this should be done. You're all drinking the same Kool-Aid, and I'm gonna I'm going to literally revolutionize how you think about things. And unfortunately, the revolution blew a few too many things up.
Yeah, so like when you go back and you look at statements that she made, the Treasury is a block on progress, okay? And she clearly was having a go at the bank, and she obviously got rid of the chief secretary in the Treasury, looked for maybe the Bank of England's mandate to be questioned again and looked at, okay? But so just to go back to, so she had this slightly outsider personality, maybe wanted to take on the establishment, okay? And the establishment won. But was there some sense in her policies at this time? And I know they often get referred to as anti-Davos, whatever that means, okay? So, but for the purpose of this conversation, that's tight fiscal, loose monetary, okay? As opposed to going, as you said,
Loose fiscal,
tight
monetary. Yeah.
So, is there any sense, or was there sense in her policies, whether it was her personality, her abrasiveness, that took her down?
Well, if we just take the policies, then there is some sense to trying to go for growth in terms of she saw a world where the pie was shrinking, the stagnation. If you get the pie to get bigger, then everybody benefits. And that was her argument for why let's just reduce taxes for everybody, for businesses, for richer people, for middle class people, for everyone. With the idea being, people with more money in their pocket will go out and spend it. Companies will invest. It was why, she was inherently not so keen on a windfall tax, because that would, potentially deter investment. One of the things that Kwasi Kwarteng actually said in that mini budget was about getting rid of the Office of Tax Simplification, because he just wanted to just get rid of taxes, just wanted to make it more simple, because we all know as long as it's straightforward to, that can help to encourage investment. Too much small print is going to make it harder for businesses to make that decision. So, and they also had this thing about, enterprise zones, investment zones. That sort of thing has been floated in the past and has worked. I will just say this about the totemic top rate of tax. Well, obviously that became this huge political row, and that shows you some of their kind of lack of political experience not to have realized that would dominate the headlines, even though in monetary terms it cost £3 or £4 billion.
Yeah, I think 2 billion out of 900 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
It was why is this the headline on the BBC News and our local news? It's 2 billion out of it. It did seem like political naivety.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where this sort of outsider status doesn't work so well, because the thing is, if you come in as an outsider, there's a whole framework around you, and much as you might want to change it or reform it or even destroy it, you can't do it all on day one. So as you say, that was naivety, really. They could have got rid of the Treasury chair, the head of the Treasury, a few months down the line if they didn't like what he was doing. And to do it on the first day, just before you make a big fiscal announcement, obviously going to leave you open to accusations you didn't do your homework, basically. But on that, actually on that top rate of tax, as you know, Ronan and I worked with George Osborne back in the day, and he actually cut that top rate of tax from 50 pence to 45. Gordon Brown put the 50 pence rate in as a little bit of a political landmine, if you like, for the Conservative Party. But actually, when it was cut from 50 to 45, it raised more tax, because the people that had, moved everything offshore at 50 pence decided at 45, okay, I'm not going to bother so much. So actually brought money in.
As happens frequently.
Yes. So, the idea that this was all mad is not quite right. It obviously served a lot of people's political purposes. It served not only the opposition, the official opposition, of course, made a lot of hay with this, but it served the purposes of her internal opposition, which had just gone through this bruising leadership battle, over the last few months between Rishi Sunak's group and the Truss group. And I think, they spotted, I don't think they actually expected it possibly to unwind as quickly as it did, but they obviously saw a way to perhaps rein her in and ultimately win the argument, which now, Rishi Sunak will feel that he has done. But I think we should talk at some stage about the market reaction, because that has really been that's really been the key here. I mean, to be honest with you, the market should have been more worried about the energy price package. I mean, they were signing off a huge blank check with guaranteeing a cap on average energy bills for 2 years. I mean, that was the lion's share of what they were doing.
Figures I saw quoted were saying is that was going to cost twice the cost of the NHS, for argument's sake, like astronomical numbers. Okay, and yet we were getting excited about 2 billion.
And to be fair, it was announced before that day. I mean, the energy price package thing came out a few days before, if not, I think it was known about for weeks before that. So, you know, it's, and of course now Jeremy Hunt has said he's only going to do it for 6 months, which...
Well, I think for the purpose of this call, we refer to him, as the Daily Telegraph does, as Jeremy Draghi.
Yeah. Well, there is a hint of technocrat about this new administration. You know, we've gone from a very strongly ideological group to a group that are effectively clearing up the mess. I mean, that's what Rishi Sunak said when he took over. He's at the steps of Downing Street. He said, you know, I'm here to fix this, which I thought is an interesting political strategy. On the one hand, you get you can benefit politically if you do clear up the mess. People say, oh, great. But then when you go to the election, what do you stand for? You know, you can't just go around clearing up people's messes. Being competent is obviously at a premium these days. That's important. I understand it. But I think against a resurgent Labour Party, there is going to be a battle of values and ideas, and that is that needs to be brought out from the new administration. But to be, you know, look, here's the other thing that really, really threw the political establishment into a spin, was the collapse in the polling numbers. That is really what did for Liz Truss, right? It just went from, in the polls, from about 30% to, I mean, one poll had them at 14%. I mean, utter electoral wipeout. And when you've got MPs realizing they thought they were in a really safe seat. I mean, I spoke to MPs who were in like the top 10% of safe seats, telling me, oh my God, this is it. I've lost my seat. I mean, that's when you get real panic. So that is, of course, what really got her out. I'm just going to, by the way, I heard an email come through, and I do apologize for that. I'm going to close down my email now, because I should have done that.
It just shows we're live, and it's interactive and real.
Yes. There we go. Shouldn't be interrupting now.
Okay, we talk about the gilt market. So the day before the budget, and I forget the specific date, there was a substantial sell-off in the UK gilt market. The Bank of England came out and did 50 basis points, not 75. Now, I want to touch a little bit more on the Bank of England later in terms of how the voting went for that. And that was the sell. So that was the sell-off. Okay. Now, the mini budget comes out. We have mayhem ensues. Okay. With the further rise in the gilt yields, and it looks like the Bank of England had to come in and save the day because of what happened in the LDI. Okay. So we might just talk for the viewers about LDI, liability-driven investing, okay, and what happened there, and whether or not the stress tests were sufficient, because it looks at the Bank of England had to say today. But can you just talk to us about what that was and why that happened?
Yes. So at its core, this is a margin call event, basically. And now we've seen loads of those over the years. In fact, there's even a film about it, isn't there? But you know, long story short is, your position goes against you, your bank rings up and asks for more margin, and if you don't have the cash, you have to try and sell something, and if the thing you're selling is what is already falling in price, then
in the first place,
then you get yourself into this doom loop, and the bank says, oh well, I don't even want to accept that as collateral because the price is falling, I want even more cash, and you just get into that doom loop. And it's important we talk about this episode because it was a real existential crisis for the pension industry and a very serious systemic risk for the UK financial system. And, you know, that has knock-on effects to the world. I mean, the UK financial system is huge and very interconnected. So this whole episode is not just about the UK. It's a real problem for everybody else. So let's step back for 1 second and just talk about what you said there about the Bank of England rate decision. There was a Fed rate decision. Really, at that point in September, so August, you'd had a sell-off in government bonds. You'd had higher yields coming in across the board. And inflation continued to go, not just stay at high levels, it got even higher. Inflation's been accelerating. And of course, everyone keeps being obsessed with this word pivot, which just goes to show you the complete obsession the markets have that higher interest rates, well, they're not here to stay. They'll cut them again. There's a recession coming. The market's wobbling. The Fed put, etc., etc. And really, I think it was one of those, straw that broke the camel's back that week, because we had that 75 from the Fed, which was another, real strong signal of we're going to keep going with this. It's not even lower for longer. It's higher for longer. And then the Bank of England didn't quite do enough, and you had a big gilt issuance on the Friday morning, and it was just like, hang on a minute, higher interest rates they're really here to stay. So you basically had a step change in market perception. Higher interest rates are here to stay. Then you got the budget thrown into that. That's going to be more borrowing, so more selling of gilts. That means more issuing of gilts, rather. That means there's more supply. The price would go down anyway. And then we hit this point, this doom loop in the price for these margin calls for the LDI funds. Now, the LDIs it's just the same sort of strategy that tries to liability-driven investing. It is to try and match up your assets and your liabilities for pension funds. And it was invented, I think, over 20 years ago now, as a way of, as all these things, making it more efficient. What that really means is leveraging up, using derivatives to leverage up, so you don't have to just
you use your cash positions. You can
exactly. But the problem with a pension fund is now this is the real issue with LDIs compared to a normal margin call. We've heard of margin call, LTCM, really. I mean, that was all that sort of thing as well, right? Your leverage is too big, your positions is too big. You've got to liquidate things. The problem with a pension fund is they cannot liquidate quickly. That's the one thing they can't do. Not only is there a difference between the pension fund and the asset manager, who has actually been subcontracted to do the LDI, but they don't always know exactly what they can sell. So they might set up a statement of investment principles at the beginning of the process, but it doesn't say anything about what to do in this circumstance. And if you have to go back to the pension fund, then because you don't have enough, you can't sell the gilts, and you don't have anything else, or you do have something else, but it's not, you don't know if you can sell it, like corporate bonds. They have to go back to the pension fund. The pension fund is run by trustees. The trustees are all over the country. Some of them might be like former workers of the teachers' pension fund. They're sitting in their home in north of England. They can't get on the phone to the right person. I mean, you cannot, I think anyone who's ever had to deal with their pension will know these things don't happen quickly.
Yeah. So in your note of yesterday, Doom Loop Part 3, which was a great read, okay?
Oh, it's very in-depth, Ronan. That's kind of you if you've bothered to read it.
It was. I took my time, but funny enough, I found as these things, as you got into it, it became more interesting. So for anybody who's interested, it was the Bank of England people were in front of the Treasury Select Committee, and there was a conversation around what was going on there. But one of the points was, just to Helen's point of a moment ago, pension fund trustees are specifically built and done to act slowly. They are built to act slowly. That's what trustees do. Okay, and this needed immediate and quick action. Okay, now I'm not sure which of the three people from the Bank of England made that, but and the other thing was that the stress tests were maybe to 100 basis points and weren't even really fully stress tests. Okay,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think you may not have just finished necessarily, Helen, but I think one of the points that I would take from what you're saying is, even though it's gone away from the headlines, it still is an underlying issue or problem or structure for the market.
I mean, they admit, so John Cunliffe is the Deputy Governor for Financial Stability, who was in that hearing at the Treasury Select Committee, which is one of Parliament's key committees. And he admitted it. He said, I cannot say with confidence this is over. I can tell you there's more resilience in the system. So we might need a 200 basis point move in gilt yields. And then the dynamic would kick in again. Now, they had a 160 point move. So, there's some comfort there that, it's not as bad as it was, but it's certainly not gone away. And as you say, they talked about, they called it a stress test. It's actually a scenario analysis. They got the pension funds in 2018 to look at, 25, 50, 100 basis point move in the gilt curve, and saw what would happen. But again, this was 160 basis point move, and it didn't sound like that much of a stress test. It sort of was just a scenario analysis. It basically sounds like they knew this was a risk, and like all things, they just didn't get into the depth of it enough to know that when it kicked off, they knew what to do. So frankly, I imagine there was a lot of panic at the Bank of England. They did get on top of it in a pretty blunt way. One of the things that came out of that Treasury Select Committee hearing was they said that, I don't know if you remember, or your viewers will remember, that Andrew Bailey said, you've got 3 days to get this done. So they were told there's 2 weeks, we're going to intervene in the market. We're going to buy gilts. Got 2 weeks. Then, when there's 3 days left, he said, you've got 3 days to get this done. And people thought, oh, it's a bit aggressive. But it turns out that some of those pension funds had the same view about how central banks would bail them out, because basically they just didn't bother. They thought, well, it'll come back in the end. Like anybody facing a loss, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You gotta take the loss. But these guys were like, well, it'll probably be all right. We'll get there. Someone will help us. And the bank was trying to say, no, we won't. And that is really actually an important point, because that affects all of the big central banks, which is, yes, we came in and we bailed everything out in March, April 2020, but now we cannot do it again. We will not do it again, because we have double-digit inflation, and that is a big change.
Yes. Okay. That's a good summary of that LDI and thing to be continued to be watched. Okay. Now, Bank of England, at the last rate increase of the 50 basis points, of the 9 members, 5 voted for the 50 basis points, 3 for 75, and 1 for 25. Okay. Which is a bit of a wide split. I don't think we get anything like that when we look at the Fed. So the bizarre thing is, despite sort of what we were saying about loose fiscal, tight monetary, on the basis of that distribution of who was looking for it, is the Bank of England the closest to a pivot? We talk about, is Powell going to pivot, the ECB or not, but that is an unusual distribution of views on rate increases.
It is. And I think, to be fair, it is because it's hard to know what to do about stagflation. As we started off this conversation, there is an argument to say that if there's enough of a recession, then the inflation will come down and, don't make the problem worse. But there's also the argument, well, if inflation gets embedded into people's expectations, then the recession will be even worse because of that. So, this is where you have this broad divergence. But the problem is they're sort of second guessing themselves. They're sort of second guessing what the fiscal side is going to do. Now, here's where I think we've got to about what the Bank of England is and how they're now looking at this. This whole episode has raised serious concerns about the credibility of the government and the Bank of England. Both of them have their credibility on the line, because yes, of course, the Bank of England did intervene, but they did do asset purchases. It's not QE, but it makes it look like it's a bit like QE, even at the time when they're trying to do QT, when they're trying to sell off their bonds. Yeah. So what I would say about this is, there's kind of now, the both sides are locked into this, what I call the credibility doom loop. If they don't, if one falls, then the other can fall. So they kind of both got to to get back on track, and they've created a rod for their own backs here. So what we're really going to see now is the Bank of England will hike a bit less because fiscal policy will be tighter. So I wouldn't call it a pivot as such. I would just call it a rebalancing between the two.
Yes, or pragmatism.
Yes, there you go. Exactly.
Okay, an element of pragmatism. Now, we want to touch on Rishi Sunak. We want to touch on Rishi Sunak leading into what it means for relations with the EU, which is obviously very important for us here and potentially the Northern Ireland Protocol. But before we do that, just one final question in relation to the UK fiscal position. Okay, the idea that the UK fiscal position is in a black hole, I find odd when we look at the fiscal deficit, the debt to GDP figures relative to some of the other G7. And when I started to read this, I kind of had one of those moments. I said, oh, have I been asleep for the last whenever? Now, some people might say yes, but joking apart. I said, have I been asleep? So where did that just suddenly pop up from? So what is your take on the UK's possible potential, arguably fiscal black hole position? Because it doesn't seem to be materially worse to me than others, but I could be wrong.
No, you're right about the numbers. And look, Germany's energy package is at least as large. I think it's about 5% of GDP, what they've agreed to do on their energy prices. And of course, they've got a bigger growth problem in Europe because they are so linked to Russia and to the rest of Europe. So, you know, they have a much worse stagflation problem. They also have a problem that with monetary union, they cannot intervene fiscally in the same way, right? So it's what's quite bizarre about the UK is the UK has now painted itself into the same sort of straitjacket that Europe is in institutionally. Like Britain had a lot more flexibility with its own currency and its own central bank and a government with a 71-seat majority. I mean, they could have done a lot of stuff. They now have to act a little bit like, you know, the Eurozone, which is where I think when we look back, the sort of the great tragedy of all of this is how that has happened. But yes, when it comes to this talk about a black hole, I think a little bit of that comes from, so it comes from that credibility issue. Because of the painted themselves into a corner, there's now like this spreadsheet, right? There's a spreadsheet that's going to come from in the UK, it'll come from the Office of Budget Responsibility, who have forecasts about growth, unemployment, inflation. That'll spit out a number. That's your gap. You're effectively, you know, your borrowing gap. So if you want to get it down, you gotta do your sums and make sure it adds up. But really, the whole point of Trussonomics was to say that some of those forecasts were not a given. If you could shock the economy up into more growth, I mean, if there's something like this, if the growth forecast were 0.5% GDP higher, you think that's something like £40 billion they don't need to find, right? So it is a slightly
extra funding, which was 60 billion.
Well, yeah, and then now with you know, interest rates in the UK coming from a 6% peak to under 5%, then you know that chopped another 20 billion off the spreadsheet. I mean, it's just a slightly bizarre way of doing policy, but it's the narrative has set in. We all know about narratives in financial markets. Well, now the narrative of financial markets has hit politics, and everyone's constrained. But I mean, I would just say this about you know, this concept of the fiscal black hole. Some of this comes from the sovereign debt crisis. Of course, we all remember it well. You guys remember it particularly well, you know, austerity and everything that happened after the financial crisis. There's a difference now because, yes, there's a lot of debt, like in 2009, 10, 11, there's a lot of debt. The governments have had to take on a lot of debt. But the problem back then was debt deflation. Now we've got debt inflation. Now, that's not so bad. You know, your debts, if you can actually inflate them away, as historically a lot of countries did, you know, but it was really bad in 2008, 9, 10, because we had loads of debt and deflation and no growth. And it was, you know, that was a disaster. So, you know, this cutting interest rates and then trying to fill the fiscal hole, you know, had to be done as sort of the lesser of two evils. but it's not the same economic conundrum now. And I think, by the way, I think what we'll see from this budget is it'll look a bit like austerity, but the idea will be, oh, in a year's time, we'll reverse it. We'll do an income tax cut in a year's time. So it's not quite like austerity, because austerity was like getting a lid on.
Okay, yes. Okay, so that is going to be mid-November now, that new
That's
budget?
right. 17th of November for the UK budget.
Okay, and just because obviously it's Thursday morning, we have the Bank of England later on today, so presumably they do another 50.
Oh, I think they might do 75. I mean, I think they now know that three-way split you've mentioned was quite damaging to the direction of monetary policy. I mean, the person that voted for the 25 basis point hike was a new member. She's only done a couple of meetings, I think. So I think Andrew Bailey would be very keen to get them all, or close to unanimous as possible, because they really, as I say, their credibility is on the line, and they've got a real risk now, a bigger risk, that they're not fighting inflation as best they might be doing, because they just had to intervene and do asset purchases, and they all know there's still a risk that might have to come back because the LDI problem isn't solved. It's just, it's got a bit further away. So I call it cautiously hawkish. I think, they're going to sound hawkish, but they don't want to blow up the market again. So it's going to be quite the communications challenge, to be honest with you. But I think they're hoping, look, they're going to sound hawkish. They can't. The slightly weird thing is they can't put in the new government's budget into their forecast because it hasn't been announced yet. Now, it was supposed to be out on the 31st of October. So, but actually, I talked about this pragmatic balance between the two. It sort of works, because the Bank of England will be a bit hawkish today. Then the government will know how big the black hole needs to be. They can do a bit more to fill the gap. And then sort of both of them are locked in on, we're being credible on inflation and we're being credible on our debt. And then they hope, I think, that they've seen the worst of it, and they can sort of ride it out.
Let a year pass by, and
yeah.
Okay. Now, Rishi Sunak, Mr. Orthodox. Okay, so we're back into Mr. Orthodox. We certainly hope here that relations with Europe will be, this terrible word, toxic, but it's a stupid word, but will be less aggressive than maybe with Boris and Liz Truss. So your insights into, obviously, on Rishi Sunak and the relationship with Europe, and if you have any comments on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which again is very important.
It is, absolutely. So look, Rishi is a Brexiteer. He voted for Brexit and he does believe in it. But his absolute number one priority for everything right now is economic competence. I mean, you can see that given he moved that budget to make sure he's literally all over the detail of it. You can see there's been a bit of an argument here about why wasn't he going to attend the COP summit, the climate change summit, which he now is. But I would sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek characterize that as, he got his homework done, so now he can go, because that is the kind of guy that he is. Incredibly hardworking, very clever, very focused, very, very keen to put the hours in, diligent, almost technocratic in a sense. So therefore, I think when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol, that now for him the overarching priority is economic competence. So he won't want to do anything really to endanger the economy right now. Broadly speaking, that will ultimately mean smoother relations with the EU, less provocation, and probably a softer Brexit. Now, what's he going to do about the ERG and the, Brexiteer wing of his party? So, they're not quite as united as they were historically in the past. They're still agitators, but they've all got slightly different opinions. I mean, for those of you who don't follow this, the weekend where it looked like Boris might be coming back into the leadership race, But on the morning after he pulled out, the chairman of the ERG said, we are split. We are not endorsing either candidate. So it's not like they have thrown their weight behind somebody. You know, they're sort of waiting to see how Rishi pans out. But what I think that means for the Northern Ireland Protocol bill is he will want to get it passed and look like he's being tough on Brexit. So, you know, that bill will go through. But the practical reality is, I'm not sure he's ever really going to invoke these unilateral powers. Not unless he's really pushed into it. For him now, as I say, the economy is the number one thing. It's very fragile at the moment. We've got 2 years till the election, maybe less, if the pressure comes back and he fails in some way. So he's just not the kind of guy to want to use Northern Ireland as a provocative tool to sell some Brexit ideology. That was the Liz Truss way. That was the Dominic Cummings way. It's not the Rishi Sunak way.
And kind of a slightly unfair question. The Stormont elections, which were supposed to be called last Friday, were postponed by forget his first name, Heaton Harris.
Chris.
What was that his doing, or would that have been Sunak's? Okay, or is it too irrelevant for him at this stage?
It will be Rishi's doing, because all of those decisions ultimately do go back up to the Prime Minister. And you're right almost to say about it being irrelevant. I don't think I can get over to you enough how obsessed he is about this budget. I mean, this budget has to work. If this budget doesn't work, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for him. It's a nightmare for the party. It's a nightmare for the country. You know, as I say, I was slightly joking when I said he's getting his homework done. I mean, it's sort of like the biggest essay crisis anyone's ever had in their lives, you know, trying to make sure all these numbers add up. And
he doesn't have Helen Thomas, who he can copy her notes from, like he might have done
at university
a number of years back in.
Well, I got to hold my hands up and say he got a much better class and degree than me, so I think I would have been the one borrowing his notes, to be honest with you. But I think I think in some respects, I think he'll want to take some of the heat out of the Irish border issues if he can. But I mean, that's not going to be that straightforward, because obviously, people in Northern Ireland, people in the Republic, people in the EU, this thing hasn't gone away. You know, it has to get resolved somehow. So he can't keep pushing it off forever.
Yeah, but like we obviously it was sort of I think it was Robert Schiller who got terribly excited about using the word on the financial narrative, but we used it a few times. But the narrative, which is very important. Okay, so of course it hadn't gone away before, but the narrative around it is a bit more soothing than progressive. The same underlying issue has to be resolved, not easily, but we just take the heat out of it. So it does strike me compared to I'm not sure about Theresa May, but even with Boris, we used this word earlier, that he's a much more, even though he's obviously quite an intellect, he is actually more politically astute, okay, and or pragmatic. Okay, now that might be giving him way too much credit, but that's my sort of sense from a distance.
I suppose it depends if you consider it politically astute to provoke that issue or to try and dampen it down. Now, Dominic Cummings actually felt that he was laying out a path here where he was going to provoke it so much that he would use that friction to challenge the question of the EU. He wanted people to say, hang on, why is Brussels pressuring Dublin? That's not what we want. That's not right. And also we have an internal market to the United Kingdom and the Union United Kingdom. So that it was, you say the word politically astute, so it depends on what your political goal is. Dominic Cummings' political goal was destroy the EU as a project anyone would want to be part of and make sure the UK stayed, sovereign. Now you can say whether that's right or wrong, but that was his angle. Now for Rishi, Brexit and sovereignty are important, and he is very much a man of sort of conservative free trade and individual responsibility, that sort of thing. But he's not, I don't believe, got he doesn't want to. I think he would just want a Brexit that works rather than
an ideological Dominic Cummings approach to it.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay, so we're likely, in the interest of time, we've sort of we're nearly on 45 minutes, which is a good time. So we are likely to see him last his full term. Okay.
Well, I don't know about that. Honestly, it sounds amazing to say it after 3 prime ministers in 3 months. And
yes. I was going to say, okay, so we won't be needing to have when leaders get lost. We won't be having another one getting lost for. So I'm surprised at you. Even your just explain why you think that's
because we're now at the most dangerous point economically and politically for this whole cycle, if you want to call it that. So, some of the chickens are coming home to roost over what happened in the pandemic. There's a lot of people now upset about lockdown because it meant, it had other costs to people's health, mental health. That's been a query. People are saying, hang on, you paid for my job in furlough. Why are you not paying for my energy bill? There's a lot of anger and a lot of confusion that's totally understandable because of the huge interventions that were made. And you've got central banks dealing with inflation who can't just keep chopping interest rates to sort of soothe everybody, calm everyone down. So basically, you've got a very divided electorate that makes it difficult to govern. As we're going to see in Italy, as we'll see in these US midterm elections, no doubt. It's going to be another fraught couple of years for the Biden administration.
Right.
So you've got that, and then you've got the economy, right? We don't know what Putin might do. We can see financial markets are really starting to struggle, and it's just we're going to see unemployment rise because all these interest rate rises will kick in, and because some jobs just shouldn't exist anymore because we've all changed how we live and work. So I think it's hard for any leader to survive. I mean, I think you should also look at Germany, where their coalition's, going to come. Well, it's come under a lot of stress already. So what I mean is, I sadly for Rishi, I don't think he can be totally confident, not least because of all the problems in his own party. I mean, it's the divisions within the Conservative Party. I have never seen anything like it. There's been a lot of bad blood shed and a lot of enemies have been created over this period. So, that doesn't go, if everything was going to be, if there was going to be economic growth, maybe you could get over it. If the public decided, we all love this policy, X, maybe that would be okay. If the Bank of England were going to keep rates steady and low, great. But none of those things are going to happen. So that's the issue. Okay,
sounds like you're going to remain extremely busy. So.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, yes, that is definitely true.
Yeah. So just for everybody, when I was talking to Helen the other day, she thought this is great. She'll be going into a quiet time, and ended up being as busy as ever. Bank of England budget postponed. Okay, so. That's a little bit of a shock. Okay, so back into very busy. We're not out of the woods yet.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, Helen, aka Blonde Money, or Blonde Money, aka Helen Thomas, I'm not quite sure which way it goes at this.
Well, we are a team. We are a team. I should say we are a team. I do have a group. It's not just me. So we're all working hard on these issues. I should say as well, Ronan, that I'm saying all this with a smile, but it breaks my heart that we are having these huge political and economic struggles. And I only keep the smile on my face because I'm optimistic at the end of it we'll come out with something better.
Yes. Yes. Well, look, it's intriguing. Okay, it's intriguing, and to go back to the point I said at the start, okay, there was a sort of a sense in a lot of commentary that people were maybe sniggering at the UK. I'm not quite sure that's absolutely correct, but it just was.
I think they were.
Yeah, but I still go back to maybe Liz Truss had a point in her go for growth economics. Okay, and a lot of other places may still like that idea of the go for growth economics. Okay, it's a kind of an anti reverse Thatcher almost. So Thatcher was clearly an unorthodox person at her time in the early 80s. Okay, and there is as much less about the silliness of Truss's policies, more about the silliness of her being the outsider and the way she did it.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, Helen, with that, on our behalf here in Santiago Investment Advisors and everybody watching, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to early in the new year seeing you again in person. And as I say, thanks for taking the time to do this talk with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks everybody for watching.